I walk into my parents' house, and the air feels too still, like a room waiting for a speech. No one asked for the china already set and the napkins folded into little fans. My mother's smile doesn't quite reach her eyes as she takes my coat. My father's handshake is just a fraction too firm. Across the table, my sister Brooke is bright with a kind of excitement that never lands on me. I notice a manila folder tucked near my father's plate, its edge peeking out like it has a schedule of its own. The roast is carved, the rolls are warm, and my name comes up the instant I sit down, not as a welcome, but as an opening. Questions about the clinic float across the table, polished and pointed. I keep my voice even and answer. The folder stays where it is waiting. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold your ground when someone tried to claim the life you built. My name is Maya Caldwell, and I grew up in a small 2-bedroom house where we were taught to say please to return what we borrowed and to take care of people the way we hoped someone would take care of us. We didn't have much, but we had a steady rhythm church on Sundays, hand-me-down school clothes, and a mother who believed good manners could soften hard days. I learned early that kindness was not weakness. It was a posture, a way to meet the world with open hands, but clear lines. Later, that posture became my work physical therapy, one careful plan at a time, one patient who needed to walk without pain, lift a grandchild, or sleep through the night without waking to a lightning bolt in the hip. I finished school with honors, and with the kind of debt that adds a second heartbeat to your life. Then I rented a cramped office and named it Renewal, because most people don't need miracles so much as someone who will stick with them through the dull, necessary weeks. My family traveled a different lane. Brooke was spark and speed big, entrances, bigger plans, a talent for making strangers feel like friends, and our parents adored how rooms bent toward her. I did the quiet work that never photographs well, forms filled correctly, progress measured late nights, balancing notes and ledgers to keep the doors open. There were times when the contrast felt like two houses on opposite sides of a street, one loud with music and lights, the other with a single lamp on, and someone at the kitchen table figuring things out. I kept my head down, believing results would speak for themselves, and they did: more referrals, better outcomes. A small staff that chose the mission over bigger paychecks. It didn't change the way my father looked at me when the clinic came up, thoughtful, almost proud, like he might say something. Then the moment would pass, and we'd be back to asking how Brooke's week went. The call from my mother for Sunday dinner felt familiar, but the careful place settings and the hush in the room told me this wasn't about pot roast. I took in the weight of the silverware and the way Brooke kept glancing at that folder near my father's plate. My mother asked about my schedule, about the waiting list, about whether I was still doing all that paperwork myself, and my father listened like a man waiting for his cue. I answered, simply feeling the temperature of the evening drop a degree with each reply. When my father finally reached for the manila folder, he smiled the kind of smile people wear when they believe they're about to be very persuasive. I folded my hands in my lap and kept my eyes on his, ready to hear what they'd come to tell me, ready to decide what I would say back. My father set his fork down with a sound that carried farther than it should have, like the first crack in a wall. He folded his napkin carefully and placed it beside his plate before looking straight at me. "Maya," he began, his voice steady but rehearsed, "your mother and I have been thinking about the future of your clinic." I stopped chewing, the words caught sharp in my throat. The manila folder by his plate was already halfway into his hand. My mother leaned in quickly, filling the silence. "Family businesses thrive when family is at the heart," she said. Her smile fixed, her hand resting on my arm, as though reassurance could soften what was coming. It wasn't reassurance. My father opened the folder and slid a sheaf of papers toward me. "Brooke has prepared a proposal," he continued. My sister straightened her shoulders, her voice brimming with excitement. "I can be your practice manager," she said, lifting her chin. "You'll focus on patients, and I'll take care of the paperwork, the marketing, everything else. I've even outlined new designs for the office." Her eyes flashed with pride as she tapped the document. "All I'm asking is 25% of the profits." For a moment the table was silent except for the faint clink of my mother adjusting her glass. I let her words settle, though my pulse quickened like a drumbeat in my ears. Brooke's voice broke the pause. "It's fair, Maya. You're stretched thin, and you've always been more comfortable with the medical side than with people." She smiled as if she'd given me a gift. My father nodded, ready to close the deal. "We've already had an attorney draw it up. All it needs is your signature." He slid the papers closer, confident. I rested my palms on the table, feeling the smooth linen beneath my fingers, remembering nights when there had been no table linens at all, only a stack of textbooks and a paper plate of ramen beside my laptop. My sister's excitement blurred with memories of double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, the exhaustion of clinical rotations, the $180,000 in loans that had shaped every choice I made. Those years came rushing back in sharp detail. The one-room apartment with furniture hauled off curbsides, the quiet meals taken standing at the counter, the nights I fell asleep face down on borrowed textbooks. I had helped Brooke too, though no one mentioned that now. I remembered sending money home during her first year of college, scraping it together, even when I had almost nothing left. I remembered hearing my stomach growl while transferring money to her account, telling myself she needed stability more than I needed food. And still I managed to keep going one shift, one exam, one loan payment at a time. My mother broke into my thoughts. "Darling, think about it. Brooke charmed Dr. Walsh at your clinic opening. He told us later how refreshing it was to meet her." She smiled fondly at my sister, then glanced back at me. "He hardly noticed you." My chest tightened at the memory of that evening, my parents mingling with guests, my father photographing Brooke wearing my cap and gown as though it were hers. "Book smarts don't build practices," he had said, shrugging off my honors cord as if it meant nothing. I looked across the table at Brooke, who was already describing how she would rearrange the waiting room, how she'd bring in her connections to boost business. I thought of the summer she'd helped at the clinic, how my patients had waited for hours because of her scheduling mistakes, how insurance claims had piled up in drawers because she found them too boring. I thought of the sorority sisters who had walked away with unauthorized discounts while I scrambled to balance the books. For weeks afterward, I had called patients one by one to apologize to repair the damage. Those memories clung to me now, bitter and undeniable. I folded my napkin slowly and set it on my plate, my voice even. "I already have a clinic manager." Brooke laughed, the sound light almost dismissive. "But she's not family," she countered. "Family has to come first." My father leaned in the weight of his authority, pressing down like it always had. "This is about ensuring the future, Maya. You built Renewal with our support, and it's time we strengthen it together." His words landed heavy, each one chosen, each one pushing against the truth I carried inside. I met his gaze steady and asked, "May I see the papers?" His eyes lit with satisfaction as he slid them toward me, confident the matter was nearly closed. My sister clasped her hands, her grin wide. "I can start tomorrow," she said brightly. "I already have ideas for a new logo." I reached for the folder, my hands calm, though my pulse raced. I opened it slowly, scanning the neat pages and the lawyer's watermark. The signatures lines were already marked with tabs, little flags pointing to where my name should go. The smell of roast beef lingered in the air, mixed with the faint perfume of Brooke's excitement. I set the papers down carefully, aligning them with the edge of the table. The silence stretched heavy and expectant as my family watched me. My mother touched her necklace, her old nervous habit. My father folded his hands, patient but certain. My sister leaned forward, waiting for me to agree. I closed the folder gently, laid my hand flat across its cover, and let the pause deepen until the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the far wall. Then I lifted my eyes, ready to answer. I closed the folder and felt the silence pressing in thicker than the steam rising from the serving dishes. My parents and Brooke waited for me to give in, but all I could hear was the echo of other dinners, other moments when what mattered to me had been overlooked. I set the folder aside without signing, and conversations stumbled back to small talk that no one cared about. By dessert, I excused myself with the first reason I could find, carrying the weight of that night out to my car like an old coat I'd worn too long. Memories I usually kept buried began to stir. I thought of my 12th birthday, when my cereal bowl held only a card with my name written on it in my mother's careful script. 2 weeks later, Brooke's 10th birthday brought a bright new bicycle with streamers on the handles, my father steadying the seat as she wobbled down the driveway while the neighbors clapped. I stood on the porch, camera in hand, at his request. "Get the shot of your sister," he called. The sun caught her hair the moment was perfect, and the picture stayed framed in the living room for years. No one remembered that I had circled bikes in catalogs every Christmas. High school graduation was no different. I gave the valedictorian speech to an auditorium of parents waving flowers, their cheers filling the room. My parents slipped in after I'd finished sliding into seats in the back row as I returned to mine. Later, my mother said traffic was terrible, and then reminded me we had to hurry for Brooke's dance recital. The medal I received that night lay on the counter at home for weeks, unopened envelopes piling on top of it. College brought more of the same. I made the dean's list again and again, but the certificates arrived by mail to our house and stayed sealed. I never asked if anyone read them. In physical therapy school, I worked nights in the hospital cafeteria, scraping trays and mopping floors before morning lectures. On graduation day, I stood in my cap and gown cords, heavy on my shoulders, scanning the crowd. Brooke found me first, running up with a grin. She tugged off my cap and perched it on her own head. "Dad wants photos," she said. For 20 minutes I watched my parents pose with her while my diploma case rested in my hands. My father returned the cap later with a smile. "Book smarts don't build practices, Maya," he said almost kindly. The years after were marked by rejection letters and ramen dinners. I remember one afternoon at the bank sitting across from a manager who shook his head before I had even finished my request for a business loan. "Without a co-signer, it isn't possible," he said, sliding the papers back toward me. I thanked him, folded the letter, and tucked it beside the others, already filling a file in my bag. My parents had co-signed a car loan for Brooke the month before, telling me it was important she had reliable transportation for interviews. The clinic was born in small rented rooms, long hours stacked one after another. I slept on treatment tables, covering myself with patient blankets after 16-hour days. The cleaning crew found me there once, spreadsheets still open on the desk. The exhaustion was sharp, but so was the focus. 2 years later, when renewal finally opened in its own space, my parents stopped by for 15 minutes between Brooke's bridal shower and a dinner reservation. My mother glanced at the walls and said, "It looks like a real doctor's office." My father studied my framed license and reminded me it's always about the people, not the degrees. They left before the ribbon was cut. That first summer, when Brooke offered to help at the front desk, the clinic nearly drowned. Appointments were shifted without notice, insurance forms left stuffed in drawers, patients waiting hours or turned away entirely. I found the documents late at night, stacks of claims untouched. Brooke shrugged when I confronted her. "They're just old folks on Medicare," she said. "They don't have anywhere important to be." I spent weeks calling every patient myself, apologizing, rescheduling, promising that renewal could be trusted. Through all of it, I held to the idea that my hard work would eventually speak louder than what had been ignored. But that night at the dinner table with my family, pushing contracts across fine china, the years I had carried alone seemed to settle on my shoulders at once. I remembered the hunger, the loneliness, the constant trade-offs. I remembered how often I had been asked to step aside so someone else could shine. As I drove home, the folder still unopened in the passenger seat, I knew I had reached another turning point. My parents and Brooke saw my clinic as theirs, to claim a reward waiting to be divided. But I also knew something they didn't. The silence I had carried for years had shaped me, and the work I had done in the shadows had built something solid. For the first time, I wondered if all those overlooked years might have left me with a kind of strength they couldn't see. I parked outside my apartment and sat for a long time, the street lamp casting a dull glow on the papers beside me. The signatures marked with bright flags seemed so simple, but they carried the weight of every dismissal and every sacrifice. I carried the folder upstairs without opening it, laid it on the counter, and turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would decide how to answer. The folder sat unopened on my counter for days, its flagged pages almost daring me to look inside again. Each evening, I passed it on my way to the fridge, and each night I told myself, not yet. Work filled the hours easily. Renewal was busier than ever, and the stacks of documentation kept me anchored. When the last patient left and the lights dimmed in the treatment rooms, I often stayed spreading insurance forms across my desk like puzzle pieces. It was during one of those late nights that I finally saw a path forward. A regional representative from Blue Cross had rejected 3 of our claims in a row. I invited her in, and she arrived with a briefcase full of regulations. "Your documentation doesn't meet the standard," she said flatly, sliding the papers back to me. I reached for a folder I had prepared, every treatment code cross-referenced with their latest manual notes marked in my handwriting from 3 weeks of evenings spent at this very desk. She leafed through them, her expression shifting from doubt to surprise. "You created these protocols yourself?" she asked. I nodded. She closed the folder slowly, then looked up. "Most clinics don't even try. We'll clear the backlog." That approval changed everything. Referrals began to rise, doctors telling their patients they trusted our outcomes. For the first time in years, Renewal reached profitability. I double-checked the numbers on the screen one night, blinking at the total, unsure if I had made a mistake. But it was real. In the silence of the office, I let myself breathe, not with relief, but with a kind of steadiness I hadn't known before. The change wasn't only financial. My staff showed me what it meant to belong to something that worked because of shared purpose. Marcus stayed late to help a patient finish her exercises, even when his own ride home had already left. Ben handled insurance calls with a patience I'd never managed to find myself. Dana, my manager, turned down a higher-paying position at the hospital, tearing up the offer letter in front of me. "They don't value people like you do," she said. "This place is different." Her trust sat heavy in my chest, not as a burden, but as proof that what I was building mattered. Those nights reminded me of conversations with Dr. Lillian Hart, my mentor who once caught me crying in a supply closet during school. She told me then, "Family and business rarely mix. Oil and water, Maya." I hadn't wanted to believe her, clinging to the hope that success would draw my family closer. But looking at my team gathered around takeout pizza after hours fixing the scheduling disasters Brooke had left behind, I realized something. The silence and neglect that once cut so deeply had also taught me persistence, precision, and patience. They had forced me to build foundations no one else expected to hold. Each Friday, I began opening staff meetings with a practice borrowed from Dr. Hart. Everyone shared one challenge and one victory from the week. From therapists to cleaning staff, each voice mattered. The room filled with stories of patients taking first steps, of small breakthroughs, of paperwork finally filed correctly. It was nothing like the family dinners where my own stories rarely reached the end before someone cut in. At Renewal, the conversation stretched and every word counted. By the time Denver Rehabilitation Center called to discuss a specialized partnership, I no longer felt like an outsider waiting for someone's approval. We gathered in the clinic after hours, 9 of us now, with grocery store cake and plastic cups. Dana raised hers and said, to Maya, who saw possibilities where others saw limits. I smiled, but my eyes went to the old business license on the wall, the embossed seal faint under the light. That document reminded me that I hadn't needed anyone's permission to start. I had just begun one late night after another. At home later, I opened the folder from the dinner table. The tabs still marked the spots for my signature, bright and insistent. I closed it again, sliding it to the back of a drawer. The next morning, I called a contact at Colorado Health Partners, a group I had met months earlier. Within weeks, I signed a management services agreement that secured every administrative detail of Renewal. For the first time, I put boundaries into writing. No family members could hold management roles without full board approval. The board was me and my new partners. I walked through the clinic the following evening, watching patients stretch, lift, and laugh under the care of my staff. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and gave me a nod as if to say, "We've got this." I realized then that my family's refusal to see me had never stopped me from building something worth seeing. It had only delayed my own recognition of it. I left the office that night with the city lights rising ahead of me, the contract tucked safely in my briefcase. The boundaries were set. For once, I felt ready for whatever came next. I returned to my parents' table 2 weeks later, this time with my leather portfolio resting against my chair. The same china was set out, the same flowers arranged in the center. My father carried the same confident look, as if the earlier hesitation had been forgotten. Brooke leaned forward with a bright smile, eager to repeat her proposal. My mother poured iced tea, her hand light on the pitcher, though her eyes stayed fixed on me. I listened quietly, letting them speak. My father reviewed his points about family legacy. My mother praised Brooke's charm, and Brooke herself outlined marketing strategies she had copied from a consultant's website. I waited until the room grew comfortable with its own certainty. Then I drew the portfolio onto my lap and clicked it open. The sound was louder than I expected, cutting through the chatter like a hammer on glass. "I signed a management services agreement last month," I said, sliding the document across the table. The corporate logo stood sharp in the corner, bold letters declaring the new structure of renewal. Colorado Health Partners now handles every administrative detail. Their board includes me and 2 partners. No other managers are permitted without unanimous approval. My father reached for the papers, his brow furrowing as he read. "You can't make a decision like this without us," he said. His voice no longer carried the calm certainty from earlier dinners. I placed another folder beside it, my fingers steady. "Here are the records from the summer Brooke worked the front desk," I said. 15 scheduling errors, 23 unauthorized discounts, 31 billing code mistakes that nearly triggered an audit. Brooke flushed, her voice sharp. "You saved those just to use against me?" I held her gaze, answering evenly. "I saved them because accuracy matters when people depend on us. These weren't learning mistakes. They were careless." My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of my hand. "Everyone makes mistakes, Maya. She's family." I withdrew a final document from my portfolio, this one created by my accountant. Over the past 3 years, Renewal provided $42,000 worth of free treatment to this family. Dad's shoulder rehabilitation, Mom's plantar fasciitis, Brooke's massage therapy before her vacations. Every one of them written off. The silence that followed carried more weight than words. My father shifted back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, her fingers trembling slightly. Brooke leaned away, crossing her arms, her face red. I gathered the folders, neatly stacking them, as I always stacked treatment plans, one step leading to the next. "My clinic isn't a family bank," I said, closing the portfolio with a firm snap. "It's my career." My father tried again, his voice softer now, bargaining. "We can adjust the terms, 20% instead of 25. A trial period." I shook my head. "There will be no share. Not now, not later." My mother pressed her hand to her chest, her voice carrying the weight of rehearsed hurt. "I never thought you would put business before family." I stood slowly, feeling the steadiness of my own words. "I'm not choosing business over family. I'm choosing boundaries over exploitation." Brooke shoved her chair back, the scrape of wood on wood filling the room. "You've always acted like you built everything yourself," she said bitterly. "We were there. We supported you." I looked at her across the table. "When at my graduation, when Dad photographed you in my cap, at the clinic opening when Mom told Dr. Walsh I was just the medical side of things, at birthdays when your gifts filled the room and mine were envelopes with cards. The memories rose without effort now, each one sharp." My father stood as well, though his height no longer felt imposing. "You've changed," he said. "Success has made you cold." I met his eyes. "No. Success has made me visible, and you don't know what to do with a daughter you can't ignore." I lifted the portfolio from the chair, surprised by how light it felt compared to the years I had carried their expectations. I turned toward the door, pausing only once. From now on, all family treatments will be billed at standard rates. Renewal's charity program is for patients who cannot pay, not for those who simply refuse. Behind me, I heard my mother's gasp, my father's muttered curse, Brooke's frustrated sob. But for the first time, their voices didn't pull me back. I stepped into the evening air with the contract and records safe in my bag. My phone buzzed with a message from Dana. "We're all here for you." I looked at the glowing screen, felt the night air on my face, and walked forward. The morning of our meeting at Cornerstone Cafe, I arrived 20 minutes early and chose a table in the corner. From there, I could see both doors, the habit of someone who had grown up waiting for approval that rarely came. I set my leather portfolio in front of me, its weight grounding me. The steam from a fresh cup of black coffee curled upward, and I wrapped my hands around the mug to steady the nervous energy that hummed in my chest. Through the glass, I watched my parents and Brooke cross the parking lot. They moved in step with one another, dressed in coordinated tans and creams, a practiced unity meant to impress. My father's jaw was already tight. My mother's hand fidgeted with her necklace, and Brooke's stride carried the confidence of someone who believed she still held the upper hand. They entered with bright greetings that felt forced. My mother leaned toward me for a hug, but I remained seated, and her hand landed awkwardly on my shoulder instead. My father sat opposite me, his voice low and stern. "Family matters should be kept at home," he said. I rested one hand lightly on the portfolio. "This isn't only a family matter. This concerns my business." Brooke slid in beside him, the scent of her perfume spilling across the table. "I know I came on strong," before she said, quickly pulling a tablet from her purse. "I've drafted a consulting proposal this time. Just 3 days a week, marketing, client, outreach, social media. It's a win for everyone." She pushed the screen toward me, smiling, as if the solution were simple. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Before we discuss proposals, there's something you should know. At the Hendersons' anniversary party last week, they congratulated me on my family partnership. They were surprised when I told them you weren't partners at all." My father stiffened. "We never said I interrupted sliding printed pages from my portfolio across the table. Here are screenshots of the Facebook posts where you called Renewal a family business. And here are text messages from the Wilsons asking about the family practice you mentioned at Bridge Club." My mother paled, her voice faltering. Those were just expressions of pride. I laid down another document. "This is an email from Dr. Alan Brooks. He asked why Dad contacted him directly about partnership opportunities in my clinic." My father's mouth pressed into a line, but he said nothing. Brooke's eyes flashed, her voice sharp with hurt. "You've been watching us, waiting to catch us." I met her gaze steadily. "I've been paying attention, the same way I did while you gave away free treatments to your friends, the same way I've done for years while building Renewal one patient at a time." My father leaned forward, trying to wrest control back into his hands. "We're here to talk about Brooke's role, not these distractions." I shook my head. "Brooke will have no role in my clinic. Neither will either of you." My mother's hand trembled as she reached across the table. "After everything we've done for you," she whispered. I pulled a spreadsheet from the portfolio and placed it between us. "Here is an itemized list of the free care this family has received from Renewal. $42,735 in value, and here are the loans I gave Brooke during my first 2 years when I could barely pay rent, $16,450, still unpaid." Brooke's voice rose, cracking. "You said those were gifts." I looked at her evenly. "I said we'd figure it out later. It's later." My father's voice grew sharper, frustration breaking through. "You can't seriously expect repayment after all we've—" I stopped him. "After all, you've—" "What?" "Missed my hooding ceremony for Brooke's fundraiser. Told Dr. Walsh I was just playing business. Left my clinic opening after 15 minutes to get to a dinner reservation. I placed both hands flat on the table, steady, deliberate. These are my terms if you want any relationship moving forward. First, my business decisions are mine alone. No input, no suggestions, no calls to colleagues. Second, all treatments for family will be billed at standard rates. Third, you stop describing yourselves as owners or partners in Renewal. Those claims end now. My mother's tears fell quickly. This time, not rehearsed, but raw. You can't mean this. We're family. I kept my voice calm. Family respects boundaries. Family celebrates achievement instead of trying to claim it. The words seemed to land hardest on my father. His face darkened, his voice low. We never thought you'd succeed on your own. We were only trying to help secure your future. He didn't seem to notice what he had admitted until silence stretched across the table. Brooke's mask finally cracked. It's not fair, she hissed. You get everything. The respect, the title, the clinic. I'm stuck in a cubicle while you play the hero. Her envy spilled into the space, heavy and undeniable. I closed the portfolio with a firm snap and stood. I built this while supporting all of you. I'm not playing at anything. I'm finished being invisible. I set money for the coffee on the table and turned toward the door. Behind me, chairs scraped, whispers hissed, and my mother's sobs caught in her throat. But I didn't look back. For the first time, I left a room without checking their faces to see if I had done enough. The sunlight outside felt clean against my skin, and the weight I had carried for years seemed to fall away with each step toward the street. A year later, I stood at the window of my office, watching the Denver skyline stretch into the late afternoon. Renewal had grown from 3 treatment rooms to 15 from a handful of employees to a team of therapists who carried the mission forward. The waiting list reached 2 months, a problem that once would have terrified me, but now filled me with gratitude. The walls displayed framed community awards beside my original license, each reminder of how far we had come. Inside the treatment floor, Marcus guided a patient carefully through her post-surgery stretches, while Dana moved between rooms with her usual calm precision. Their dedication gave Renewal its strength, and the community noticed. Dr. Brooks told me recently, I send patients here because you built this from the ground up. It's genuine. His words carried more weight than my family's claims ever had. Not everyone was fooled by those claims. Neighbors and colleagues began to question my parents when they introduced themselves as partners. Friends at their country club asked why their names never appeared on Renewal's documents. My mother's social media posts' proud captions about our clinic drew quiet skepticism from people who had seen the truth inside our doors. Slowly, the image they tried to project began to unravel. At the same time, Renewal expanded its reach. We launched a pro bono program for patients who otherwise couldn't afford care, and I established a scholarship fund for students entering physical therapy with financial need. When the first 2 recipients visited the clinic, their eyes bright with relief, Dana whispered, "This is what matters." I knew she was right. Brooke, meanwhile, had disappeared from my professional life completely. The only time her name surfaced was when one of her former friends booked an appointment and paid full price a subtle recognition of the boundaries I had put in place. My father tried reaching my accountant again, but Denise, our accountant, called to warn me, her voice steady. I told him any further interference could be considered harassment. I filed her note away with the others, each one a small piece of protection. Still, the pressure from my family shifted in quieter ways. Letters arrived, some written in my father's firm hand, others in my mother's looping script. They spoke of misunderstandings, of a desire to mend relationships, but always on their terms. I tucked them into a drawer in my office, along with the contracts and records I had gathered over the years. Each document was proof of what I had endured and why I had chosen the boundaries I now held. When I walked through the clinic, I saw evidence of justice in motion. A patient who once had been rescheduled 3 times because of Brooke's errors now completed her therapy without a single missed session. Elderly couples who had once been treated as inconveniences were now greeted warmly at the front desk by Ben. Every corner of Renewal reflected the difference between exploitation and respect. One Friday evening, our staff gathered after hours for a small celebration. Grocery store, cake, paper plates, and the hum of conversation filled the break room. Dana raised a cup and said, "To the clinic that chose integrity over everything else." The cheer that followed wasn't loud, but it carried the steady sound of loyalty earned. I thought of the dinners at my parents' house, where words like family and support had been used as leverage. Those gatherings had ended with me leaving in silence. Here among my staff, there was no need for speeches. Their presence was enough. The justice didn't come in one sweeping moment. It came in the steady erosion of my family's false claims, in the recognition from the community, and in the quiet success of Renewal itself. Each new referral, each patient who left with a smile, each award hung on the wall made the truth undeniable. When my mother tried once more leaving a note at the front desk during my absence, Dana handed it to me later. It was softer than the letters before, written in careful words about missing her daughter, about hoping for healing. I placed it in the same drawer as the others, not with anger, but with patience. Some wounds take longer to heal, and this time the pace was mine to set. Justice had arrived not with revenge, but with growth. The life I had built stood firm, visible to anyone who chose to see it, and the more Renewal thrived, the clearer the truth became to everyone around us. One evening, I stood in the treatment room with Mrs. Abernathy, guiding her through her final session after months of work. She lifted her arm without hesitation, her eyes bright with relief. "You gave me my life back," she said. I smiled and reminded her it was her persistence that carried her this far. Watching her leave with confidence in her step, I felt a quiet fullness I hadn't known at the start of this journey. Later that night, 3 new graduates gathered in our conference room for their mentorship session. Their notebooks were open, their questions eager. I told them the most important lesson wasn't a technique or a chart, it was knowing their own worth. "In this field," I explained, "you will give endlessly, but what you give must be respected." Their nods reminded me of my own long nights believing silence meant failure, when in truth it had been shaping my strength. The boundaries I set began to ripple outward. My mother reached out more gently now, sharing photos of her volunteer work at the community garden. Brooke found her first steady job in an office that had nothing to do with my clinic. Her email carried no exclamation points, only a simple update, and I recognized it as a step forward. My father stayed silent, his absence a reminder that some repairs require more time than others. Meanwhile, Renewal kept growing. Our pro bono program expanded to serve more families who would otherwise go without care. The scholarship fund welcomed its first class of recipients, each one a reminder that opportunities can be planted where none existed before. On Friday evenings, the break room filled with the sound of laughter over takeout dinners, the kind of family I had chosen, one built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. At a dinner with friends, Melissa raised a glass and said, "To Maya, who taught us that standing your ground isn't selfish, it's necessary." The words lingered not as praise, but as truth I had lived into. Later, I stepped outside onto the porch, looking at the mountains against the fading light. They stood steady and immovable the same way I had learned to stand. I finally understood that I could heal without sacrificing myself. The gratitude of patients, the loyalty of my staff, and the simple peace of knowing I had protected what I built, these were the real measures of success. My family's approval had once felt essential, but what truly mattered was being seen and choosing to see myself clearly. If you've ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own worth, you know the strength it takes. And if you've come this far with me, I'd love to hear your story too. Share it in the comments, let me know where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Because sometimes the greatest justice isn't loud or public. It's living a life that honors your own boundaries and finally standing tall in the place you've built with your own hands.